Oh, well, you can't win them all. Of course, what I'm referring to is Rafa Nadal's return to tennis this past week in Washington, D.C. ended more prematurely than a lot of us would have expected. But of course, there's a lot to unpack there, both positive and negative, so let's just hop into it. Now, a lot of us expected Nadal to just be out till Canada when he announced he was pulling out of the Olympics and Wimbledon. These past 2 years, he's basically just used only Canada as his prep for the US Open, and you expected that to continue this year unless he got upset early in Canada. Then he maybe would play Cincy, but with him being at the stage of his career where he needs to manage his schedule better, he has usually just opted to stick with Canada these past couple years, which made his commitment to playing the tune-up in Washington, D.C. this year all the more surprising.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Of course, this was his maiden appearance at this tournament in his career. He had never before visited the nation's capital, and it showed. But as a result, you know me, I will never say no to seeing more Rafa Nadal. So I marked my calendar for this week. I was really excited. It was awesome to see him get the full red carpet treatment by the whole tournament, the organizers, the crowd. Attendance was through the roof, created some electric atmospheres for his matches. His practices, you had people queuing out the doors for just a glimpse of him practicing pretty much really ever since he touched down in the States in DC. The people just kind of threw their arms around him, which was just amazing to see. And as far as once he stepped on the court, I will admit that despite knowing that he would be a bit rusty straight off the break, I did have expectations of him at the very least making it to the weekend, which of course meant either like a semi or a final berth. Field was a bit depleted post-Olympics, and even a rusty Nadal I felt could maneuver his way through. And certainly I didn't expect him to get caught up in the battles that he found himself in against Jack Sock and Lloyd Harris. But that being said, his week was not nearly as much of a failure and a disaster as you would think just looking at the scores and looking at the names he was playing against. I do feel like much of the reactions, more on the negative and overreacting side, were probably in that group that didn't watch the matches, just looked at the score or watched the highlights and came to their own conclusions. But that's not to say I am totally just not concerned. I was definitely really alarmed in that third set against Sock in his first match. The guy looked to visibly be in pain as that third set went on against Sock. It became abundantly clear in that set that he still hadn't shaken this left foot injury that had taken him out these last almost 2 months, where he hadn't played a match since the French Open semi. He was kind of just able to drag himself to the finish line, and in a way that was kind of encouraging, where it was like, okay, if he's able to push himself as hard as he is, it can't be like crippling. But at the same time, watching that match, it was like win or lose, this is probably going to be his last match in DC. I don't see him finishing this event. I don't see him making the trip to Toronto next week. If this is how he looks 2 months off, first match back. Because late in that match he was clearly hobbled. He confirmed that after the match, said the foot was bothering him more than it should have and what he thought it would be after these 2 months off. And with the US Open around the corner, it certainly was a really alarming sight. But to some degrees, those concerns were alleviated, at least for now, against Lloyd Harris in his next match. He was able to play the next day and looked a good deal more healthy. And if that continues into his remaining hardcourt prep, then that'll definitely relieve the biggest red flag from this week. As far as his play goes, pretty much what you would expect for a guy who hadn't played in almost 2 months. There were honestly stretches where he did look to be near his best. He looked great in the first set against Sock and the second set against Lloyd Harris and just other patches within those 2 matches. But then there were other patches where he looked really just mediocre. Never really bad, but just stretches where he didn't look like Rafa Nadal. And that's to be expected. Historically, especially recently, Nadal has needed matches off a break to kind of get going, and you can live with looking the way he looked in his opening 2 matches. Nothing really alarming. The closest aspect of his game you could probably say that was bad per se would probably be the serve. But then again, the serve has been a facet of his game that just has not been up to par all season. It did him no favors having that back injury early in the year in Australia. His serve has pretty much just been a no-show all year, and expecting it to magically click back into place off a 2-month break was wishful thinking. It was off particularly in the Sock match. At least in the Lloyd Harris match, it had stretches where he was serving well. Finished that match looking kind of shaky with the serve, but again, that's just been one of the stories of his season so far. And at the end of the day, he definitely could have looked worse than he did. He's going to get a bit of a bad rap for people that didn't actually watch the matches, but on the other side of the net, Lloyd Harris and Jack Sock both redlined, played some of the best, if not the best matches they have in a very, very long time. Sock, his forehand that has always shown so much promise, was hitting bombs all over the place. Sock played his best match definitively in like 4 years. He has literally struggled to win any match in any year since 2017 where he really peaked. And then Lloyd Harris himself, the difference there really was Rafa's rust with a couple of bad missed returns late in the 3rd set. But in addition, just really, really clutch pinpoint serving under pressure. He went like 15 aces, I believe, in that match, and a lot of those came when Nadal was applying the pressure. And Lloyd Harris himself is having his best season, beat Team, albeit 2021 Dominic Team in Dubai, made the final there. I do remember he took the first set off Fed at Wimbledon in 2019. He's no scrub. Sock on his day obviously is no scrub. I'm aware that Nadal at his best doesn't struggle, or at least finds a way through both those guys more convincingly. But you shouldn't have expected Nadal to come out guns blazing. I will be concerned if we get another early loss like this in Canada. Doesn't help that he's been dealt a really tricky draw. Might see Lloyd Harris again straight off the bat, which I don't mind, but Rafa's definitely going to have to improve in Toronto. He's of course signed up for all 3 hardcourt events. He was never going to probably play all 3 unless he gets upset early in Toronto as well. But coming off the break that he is, I feel he needs a deep run here in Toronto just to build confidence back up, get more matches under his belt. It is kind of nice now that he has some time in between DC and Toronto. And yeah, for him, if he's going to want to have a shot at this year's US Open, he's going to need a deep run at either Toronto or, depending if he plays, Cincinnati. But this week definitely should not be a barometer of how you see Nadal's future, whether it be anywhere or just off clay, or his prospects for the US Open, all of that. It's unreasonable to make your calls on that based on this week this far ahead of the US Open and beyond that. If this year tells you anything, you literally just saw Djokovic in clay season lose to Dan Evans and Karatsev early on in the clay season just to play his best French Open in like 5 years. I'm not alluding to anything like that for Rafa at this US Open. I'm not getting too high or too low as far as my expectations this year. It's been very strange, a strange season for Rafa, one marred by some uncharacteristic blunders in crunch time situations, physical issues, and yada yada yada. And all of that could mean that his window is slowly closing. But right now there's no way of telling that for sure. And his most recent showing in Washington for damn sure should not be your indicator. The guy has been back all of 5 minutes, played pretty decently all things considered. He could have looked much worse. What we got was a mixed bag, which should have been along the lines of what was expected of him this week. Can't really take much away from that. You'll learn a whole lot more about where he is next week in Toronto, but I wouldn't lean too far one way or the other as far as whether Nadal's comeback in DC was a success or a failure. But that being said, that concludes this video. If you enjoyed the video, it would be much appreciated if you could subscribe if you're not already or are new here. Hit that like button and click the bell next to my name if you'd like to be notified whenever I upload. I appreciate y'all for watching, and I will see y'all in the next one.